We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. Uh-oh, thrift diving.
Hey, what's up? It's Serena Pia from thriftdiving.com, which is a podcast, a blog, and a YouTube channel that helps you decorate, improve, and maintain your home using paint, power tools, and of course, thrift stores. And we don't sacrifice our budget, the environment, or style. Welcome to episode 16 of the podcast. And today, that's exactly what we're talking about. We are talking about thrift stores. You know, I adore thrift stores. Of course, you know that by the name, thrift diving. And the problem is that because of the pandemic, I've not really been going to thrift stores. It's not that I'm afraid to leave the house. I go to Home Depot, I go to the grocery store, but I've not really been to thrift stores because we've all just been staying inside, right? They weren't even open for a long time. So now that people are getting back into the world, everything's opening up, we're taking our masks off, some of us are, we're now thinking about getting back into the thrift store and resuming some of our activities that we just absolutely love. So today I'm going to talk about 7 lessons that I have learned from the thrift store. Now, there's more than 7 actually, but these are 7 that I wrote about some time ago, and I wanted to revisit them because I think they're important, especially as we get back into the thrift stores and we're looking for things. And I just want to talk about some tips that will help you when you're going back into the thrift stores. And I just want to say, I really miss the thrift store. Another reason that I've not been going as much is because, you know, if you remember from episode 1, when we moved into this house, we didn't have any furniture. We couldn't even afford to buy furniture. We had a few pieces from our condo. Everything else was just non-existent. Couldn't afford to pay for it. So I ended up going to thrift stores over and over and over, going what I call thrift diving, hence the name. And my house started to get full. We've lived here for 10 years. And now if I were to even bring another piece of furniture into the house, I don't think I have anywhere to put it. I'd have to get rid of something and then make space for something else to come in. So, you know, when you've lived in your home for a number of years, there's just no more space. And so I don't go to the thrift store as much, but it's honestly, aside from the library, which has also not been open, which has been crazy, the thrift store is my favorite place to go to. I love to go. One time, this was probably about 3 years ago, there was a man that I met at the thrift store. His name was Pete. I don't even know exactly how he and I started to talk, but I would run into him all the time and we became friends. And what was supposed to be a 5-minute, hey, how you doing? Did you find anything good today? Oh, great. Love what you bought. Cool. I'll see you next time. It would turn into these 3-hour visits where we would go around the store together, and he would actually teach me a lot of stuff. He knows a lot of stuff about mid-century modern furniture, about what's valuable, what's not. And Pete, he's retired. He's in his 60s. He goes to the thrift store literally every day. And the funny thing is, he's not the only person that goes every day. You'll see these guys, they come out real early. As soon as the thrift store opens, they'll hunt for the collectibles, the things that are valuable, and then they buy them and then they sell it, whether online or they'll do shows. Of course, now because of the pandemic, a lot of shows probably were canceled, right? Nobody's having shows, but there would be these flea markets and shows where people would come, you'd have a booth, and Pete would always have it set up real nice with all of his mid-century modern things that he would collect. And apparently he's got storage bin after storage bin after storage facility rented because he finds so much stuff. So as you can see, he's someone who has made a living at this in his retired years, and he has taught me a thing or two. So I'm going to share those lessons with you today. And if there's any lessons that you have learned from thrift stores, hit me up on Instagram at Thrift Diving or Twitter, or send me an email, Serena at Thrift Diving, and let me know your tips. And I'll even include those in the blog post or in the show notes so that other people can learn about what your tips are. Okay, so let's start with number 1. The first one is hire help when you need to strip furniture. I don't know if you've ever stripped furniture before, but let me tell you, it is not the most pleasant thing. There's something gratifying about it, like when you're scraping off this old yucky finish and it's caked up on the knife and you're scraping it off. I mean, there's a little bit of satisfaction there, but I can tell you that if you are stripping something that has a lot of nooks and crannies, it's very difficult. I mean, you've got to get in there with a wire brush. And even if you do that, there's some parts of it that are not going to be completely stripped. It's a lot of work stripping furniture. So this was one thing that Pete had shared with me. When you are looking to find an old piece of furniture, don't feel like you've got to do all the work yourself. If you have a place that's nearby, depending on where you live, there might be places called dip and strip. Now, it's really funny because when Pete told me this, I thought, oh my gosh, I never imagined that these places existed. He's like, yeah, I got a friend that works in a dip and strip place. And, he kind of hooks me up with a discount. And if I find a really nice piece of furniture that I want to redo, but I don't want to strip it, I will actually take the piece of furniture to him and let him dip it and strip it for me. So even though you may or may not, depending on where you live, have a place where you could get help with stripping furniture, you may not even have a dip and strip furniture service in your area. But the point is that if you find a piece of furniture that you like at the thrift store, see if there is a dip and strip. And if there's not, do it yourself. But don't be afraid to reach out to someone else and say, hey, I'd love to get this painted. Could you do this for me? We DIYers, we feel like we have to do everything ourselves, right? Like think about who you are as a person. If you're like me and you're a DIYer, you don't like asking for help that often, right? Like you feel like if you can do it yourself, why not? Why not do it myself? But the lesson that I learned from him is that not everything has to be done yourself. Now, Pete knows how to strip furniture. He knows how to paint furniture and restore things. And he does a lot of that. He loves actually metal furniture. He told me that he wanted to get a sandblaster so that he could strip down the metal and then, sort of buff it out and bring it back to its nice metal shine, which is fabulous. I love that look. But he's not afraid to get help. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Get someone to strip it for you. Even if it's not a dip and strip, there are people that can provide those services. I would look on Facebook Marketplace. For example, if you go there and you find people who are selling painted furniture, or maybe if they mention that something's been stripped and refinished, see if that person could actually do this piece for you. Or just do a Google search and see if there are dip and strip furniture stripping services in your area. So that's the first lesson. Don't feel like you have to do everything yourself. The second lesson, and this is a biggie because if you're like me, you struggle here, but the second lesson is to only buy that particular thing at the thrift store if you know exactly what you're going to do with it. And the reason why I say this is because we DIYers, we have this brain that we can just imagine the beauty in things, right? Like we look at something, we know it's ugly, it's got water stains, watermarks, it's chipped, and we know it's beautiful. We know what it could be. And I think we fall in love with that fantasy of, oh my gosh, this could be beautiful. I could see this in my dining room. But the problem is sometimes we buy things and we don't know exactly what we're going to do with it. And if you're like me, you would pack your garage to the freaking roof with all the things that you find at the thrift store. I've been there. I have been there where you could barely walk through the garage because things are just so packed in there. If you know where it's going to go, like if you know this is a table that's going in my dining room, go ahead and buy it. But if you're just buying something because it looks cool, or maybe you got a deal on it, or you're like, oh, I think that's going to look good in that area, but I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with that. It's okay to leave things at the thrift store. Don't buy everything that catches your eye because you will start to get into this hoarding. Now, I know hoarding is the real mental issue. So when I say hoarding, I'm not speaking to that. We're using the term loosely. We're hoarding things. But just remember, buy things that you know you're going to probably use in the next, I'm going to say 3 months, and you know exactly where it's going to go. It has a purpose. Otherwise, you'll get yourself into a lot of trouble. And can I just say that when we start buying a lot of things that we know have potential, but we're not sure what we're going to do with them or when we're going to tackle them, it creates a lot of stress. I have felt this stress a lot of times with projects where I feel like I can't decide what to do. Well, maybe I could do this table, but I really should do this other project. And sometimes what happens is that you end up doing nothing because you can't make up your mind or you feel stressed out. And that happens when you have too many projects on your plate. This actually goes back to episode, I believe it's episode 2. I'll put it down in the show notes, where I spoke to a gentleman by the name, he's an author, this guy Charles Gilkey, and he talks about how to get projects done, how to go from idea to actually getting something done, because I struggle with that, right? I'm sure you do too. But you might want to listen to that. But I think part of it is only having a certain number of projects on your plate, right? Like 3 to 5 projects. So don't overwhelm yourself and buy everything at the thrift store that looks good. Pick a few projects, make sure you get them done first before you move on to something else, and make sure you know exactly what you're going to do with it. So that's the second lesson. The third lesson that I learned is that sometimes you can buy pieces just for the pieces. So a good example is, let's take French Provincial, right? French Provincial furniture. It's beautiful. It's that furniture I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't, but I would have loved to have had it. But most of us who are in my age group, I'm 43, we remember those pieces from the 80s, maybe the 70s or the 60s. And I've done a lot of French Provincial dressers. I think I've done like 1 desk and 2 or 3 dressers. It's a very popular style of furniture, and it's actually coming back. Or did it ever go out? I don't know. But we DIYers, we tend to love it. Well, one day at the thrift store, I saw a French Provincial dresser. It was actually in pretty bad shape. I mean, it was very loose and rocking back and forth. But I saw the handles and I thought, oh my gosh, I'd love those handles. And the dresser was only $10. So I went ahead and bought the dresser. And as soon as I bought the dresser, I went over and I think the handles were kind of loose. So I didn't need a screwdriver or anything like that. And I just loosened up the handles, took the handles, and I told the people, I said, hey, I'm just buying this for the handles. You can take everything else. Because those are actually pretty popular. You know, you could even sell those on Etsy. So when you go to the thrift store, sometimes you will see something that maybe you don't want the whole piece, you just want a piece of it. You know, another good example is that day when I was with Pete at the thrift store, we saw this little cute oak sewing table. Like we both looked at it at the same time, like, wow, that looks like a really nice sewing table. But we didn't need a sewing table. And honestly, it was very 1980s. But with sewing tables, you know that little flap that folds over? You just flip that little top out and it extends that arm. Well, it was solid wood. It was solid oak. And if you know anything about solid wood, it's expensive. It's very, very expensive, especially now today. I don't know if you've been to Home Depot or Lowe's to buy wood. It's nearly impossible to find materials. I'm telling you, like you go there and the shelves are bare and you're like, wait, I'm just trying to get a sheet of plywood. Like, where's all the wood? Because there's such a demand right now. And I think just because of COVID, everything is just slowed down. Production is slowed down. Transportation, everything is slowed down. So there's a shortage, a lot of shortages with materials, including home goods, products that we need in the DIY space. But this particular little sewing table, it had a great piece of solid wood right there on top. And the sewing desk was only $10. So I'm like, you could easily just buy this and take the piece of wood on top and do something cool with a solid piece of oak that would probably cost you a lot more money if you were to buy it at Home Depot or at Lowe's. So when you go to the thrift store, look at pieces of the furniture or pieces of whatever it is that you're looking for. Sometimes it could be a cool knob. Sometimes it could be a solid piece of wood. Sometimes it could be the legs of something. You know, sometimes legs, you can reuse legs for other projects. So don't think that you have to buy and use the whole piece of furniture. So it's good to just think of it that way. Like it's not just the whole piece, it's the parts too. So that's lesson number 3 that I've learned on my own, but also in talking to Pete. Number 4 that I learned is don't skip the glassware. When I go to the thrift store, that's the least interesting aisle for me. I don't know about you, but I just see a bunch of glasses. I don't even look. I just skip right past there. But there's a lot of cool things that you can find in the glassware section, especially if you're someone who loves to entertain. Now that everything's opening back up, people are going to start having people over to their houses. And if you can find a collection of really cool glasses, maybe a set of 6, sometimes they've got beautiful colors. There's a set that I bought from Community Forklift. Here in the Maryland area, we've got this really cool salvage spot called Community Forklift. So one day I went there and I found 6 glasses, and they had the really beautiful light blue hue to them. Like, it was beautiful. And I'm not a big entertainer. In fact, I don't think I've even used them before, but I have them sitting out ready for any guests that do come over. But when you go to the thrift store, look in the section of the glassware and see if you can find a nice set of vintage glassware, maybe pink or blues or greens. You don't want to buy just 1 or 2. Look for the ones that maybe you could sell on Etsy, vintage glassware, or maybe you could just put in your cabinet and have a nice little display of glassware. My friend Jamila Wallace, she was on episode, I believe it was like episode 7 and 8, or maybe it was 8 and 9, where we talked about thrift stores. She has done some really great projects where she had restored this beautiful cabinet that her neighbor was throwing out. I think she got it for free, or maybe it was $40 or something. And she's got some beautiful glassware in there, vintage glassware that just looks amazing. And she highlighted certain parts of this cabinet with gold, and it just looks so nice with the glassware. So if you're someone that likes to have people over, or maybe just love glassware, definitely look for sets of 6 and find those pieces that look different, like they're valuable. So that's definitely something to look for at the thrift store. Another thing that Pete pointed out to me is gorgeous glass liquor bottles. So this is another thing that I'd never looked at, but when you see the collection that thrift stores have, you can get a really nice bottle for maybe $6, $7, maybe $10. And of course, it's not something you're going to use every day. But if you are having guests over, if you are someone who loves to entertain, look for some vintage bottles that you could put maybe some whiskey or brandy or any of this dark alcohol that you love. I hate dark alcohol, honestly. I think it just tastes like rubbing alcohol, all of it. But it'll look great, and it's great for your guests when you have people over to your home. So the 5th lesson that I learned is that inspiration can come from everywhere. And this is one thing that's so much fun about the thrift store, is being able to walk in there and see different styles from different eras, right? Like you can see some 60s, you've got 70s, you've got some 80s. Well, there was a 1950s folding chair that I saw in there one day, and I wasn't going to buy it because it was just one. If it was 2, maybe I would have bought it. But the back was solid wood and had this really cool geometric shape that it looked like somebody had cut it out with maybe like a jigsaw or maybe a router. It just looked really cool. And I remember looking at that saying, wow, I could do a design like that. So when you're at the thrift store, you don't always have to buy something. Sometimes you might just want to walk through and get inspiration. Sometimes it could be in the style of furniture. Sometimes it could be like what happened to me one time where I was walking down this section where they had a lot of wooden bowls and things like that. And I stood there looking at this stack of wooden bowls, and I was like, I'm really intrigued by this. What could I do with this stack of wooden bowls? Well, let me tell you, I actually ended up making a bench for my living room. This was several years ago. And the wooden bowls looked like bun feet. If you've ever been to the hardware store, you'll know that if you buy feet or legs for a project, it's so freaking expensive. It's like, it's just a piece of wood and I'm just making a leg out of it. Why is it so expensive? Most bun feet, I think they're about $10, $10 or $11 at the hardware store. Well, these bowls were shaped just like bun feet. So I bought the bowl for like 99 cents or maybe $2, drilled a hole through it, used a little wing nut with a screw, and just made my own feet for a bench. So inspiration comes from everywhere, especially in the thrift store. And you might just decide that you want to go there one day just to walk around and see what stands out to you. Doesn't mean you have to take your purse in or take your wallet. Leave that stuff in the car if you really don't want to spend money. But just go in and allow yourself to walk around and see what jumps out to you. Lesson number 6, look for the valuable stuff. Now, in the previous episode with Jamila Wallace, we talked about what some of those valuable things are in terms of furniture, right? Like looking at the joints of drawers and how those are put together. If it's a dovetail, more likely it's going to be more valuable than if it's not dovetail joinery. But when I walked around with Pete, he noticed some things that I would have never even noticed. For example, we were walking through the aisles and he saw this brown. Now, this is how I would describe it. My first thought is that it was an ugly brown cooler that I would never in a million years think of buying. And he picked it up. He's like, wow, this is really cool. If you notice, he said, this top here is pretty heavy. This looks like it's a pretty valuable icebox. And I thought, no, this cooler is not, no, it's not valuable. Well, he turned it over. He did a little bit of researching and come to find out they were actually selling online this vintage cooler. It was $6 at the thrift store. Well, it was at least 3, 4, 5 times that. So when you're at the thrift store looking for things that are valuable, we know that we can turn things over, look on the bottom, look for the brand name. You can use your phone to search to see if you can find the value online. But looking at the weight of something, that's one thing that he has taught me. And I also learned that from Jamela, is that when something is a little heavier, it's heavier because it's a better quality. So keep that in mind, whether you're looking for furniture. If you pick something up and it's very light, most likely it's probably like an MDF. It's some sort of particle board. But if it's heavy, if it's got weight to it, oh, that's valuable. Not everything you're going to be able to turn over because of the size. But if you're looking at dressers, sometimes you can pull the drawers out and see the name of it on the inside of the drawer. Sometimes they have it right there on the inside of the drawer, like burnt onto the side. But in his case, he likes looking for furniture, but he also likes looking for those little, I don't want to say knickknacks, but those things that people would probably walk past. And that's when he was like, no, this is a very valuable cooler, because look at the handle. You would not have a manufacturer who would put on a nice heavy handle knowing that this was a piece of crap. Sure enough, he found out that it was actually pretty valuable. So that's one thing that I learned from him is, yes, turning it over, looking on your phone, but also weigh it in your hand. That'll tell you whether or not it's good quality. And honestly, if he had just cleaned this up, and I think he actually did buy it that day, but if you just clean it up and polish it up, it's something that you can sell, or it looks great in your backyard patio get-together. So just go into the thrift store, looking at these things and doing your research. You can find a lot of valuable things. And the last one, lesson 7, thrift diving is really a walk down memory lane. And that day that Pete and I were walking through the thrift store, we were in the book section and there was a book that jumped out at me. Remember Sweet Valley High, the Sweet Valley Twins? If you were of my age group, I'm 43, so if you were in the 90s, late 80s, teenager years, I can tell you, you definitely remember Sweet Valley Twins. These were Elizabeth and Jessica Wakefield. Where else can you find these relics of the past? You can't. I mean, of course, antique shops, but still, they're places that value things from the past. And sometimes when you're just walking through the thrift store, seeing these pieces of furniture or these wall decor items, it just brings up the past. So one time I went to the thrift store and I found this old wall hanging. I can't even describe it. It was made out of like a grass. That's what it was, like a grass. It was a tan color and it was in the shape of a spade. And I remember in my house growing up, my mom would hang these on the wall. There was like a set of 3 and it didn't matter where we lived or what way she decorated the room, they were always there. Well, one day while walking through the thrift store, I actually saw one and I thought, oh my gosh. So I took a picture of it and I sent it to my mom. Like I was holding it like, oh my gosh, look at what I found. And it was so funny. It was like a walk down memory lane. So I think that's why I love thrift stores, is because you never know what you're going to find. And nowadays when you go to the store, everything is so 2021. You know, everybody can buy it. Everyone can order it online. But the things at the thrift store, you can't necessarily order them online. And if you can, it takes a little bit of digging to find them. And sometimes it's the little surprises that jump out to you, like the books that you hadn't thought of in a number of years, or something that you saw that your mom used to hang on the wall. And oh my gosh, there it is. It's still ugly, but there it is. But it's just so much fun. I love thrift stores. And in fact, as I'm recording this to you, I'm just thinking, man, I've got to get to the thrift store. And it has to be a day when you're not pressured for time. You don't ever want to go into the thrift store and say, oh, I've only got 15 minutes. No, you want to go and know that there's nothing else that is weighing on your mind that day that you got to do, so that you can just go in and walk around, or maybe even take a Saturday. Maybe the kids are off doing something else, or maybe you're going to spend some time by yourself, but just find maybe 3 or 4 thrift stores that you've never been to before in your area and say, you know what, I'm just going to make a day of it. Maybe I'll go grab lunch somewhere, and then I'm just going to hit the thrift stores and see what I can find. And again, remember, we're not going to buy everything. We're not going to buy things that we don't need, but just spending that time looking at these things that you just appreciate so much for the memories that they bring. And also, you might really just need something for your house. And what better way to find it than at a thrift store, right? So those are the 7 lessons that I have for you. And it is probably nothing that you haven't already heard, but it's just a way for you to remember when you go to the thrift store, don't feel like you've got to buy everything. Don't feel like just because it is something that's valuable that you need it. I'll tell you a story. There was and I don't even remember what you call it, but it's one of those really old record players. Is it like oh gosh, I can't even remember the name of it, but it cost me $150. That's the most expensive thing that I'd ever paid for at the thrift store. It was crazy. But I remember saying, well, here on eBay, it's blah, blah, blah number of dollars. And here it is for $150. So that's a deal. I've got to buy it. Well, I can tell you that thing just sat in my garage for at least 3 years, taking up space. It was not in bad condition, but there was no place for it in my home. I didn't even have a space for it. I just wanted to buy it because I thought, wow, I'm getting a good deal on something that's very valuable. No, I ended up just donating it back to the thrift store like 3 years later. So everything that you find that's a good deal, you don't have to bring it home. And I feel like as I get older, I'm becoming a little bit more careful about what I bring home, not just because of bed bugs. And you can listen to that in episode 9 down below, not just because of bed bugs, but because I don't want to just bring anything home that doesn't speak to me, right? I feel like as I have grown into my house, now it's time for me to make sure that my home really reflects what it is that I want it to reflect. Because I feel like for a number of years, I just bought everything that I thought was valuable and vintage and was cool, but it didn't necessarily represent who I am, my style, and what I wanted my house to be. So now I'm actually pushing back a little bit on things that I see. People will offer me furniture. They'll say, hey, because they know I love old stuff. They'll send me text messages and emails. Hey, I've got this old table here. I don't want to just give it away to anybody. Do you want first dibs on it? And even though, like in the past, I will have said, oh my God, yes, I'll take that. I'd love to do this project. I've been turning a lot of things down. Now when I'm driving past, I mean, when I see something on the side of the road, my head does a turn for sure. Like it's swiveling like, what? Hold up. Wait, what is that? But I try not to bring it home unless I know it's something that I really, really need and something that reflects who I am as a person. And yes, could make a good project for thrift diving, of course. So anyway, those are just some lessons that I've learned along the way as we're about to get started on yard sale season, garage store seasons. All of this applies to those as well. Don't go crazy. Don't bring home every deal that you find, and only bring it home if you know you've got a place for it and you really, really, really like it. Otherwise, you're just going to junk up your house and be donating it in 2 years anyway when you've said, I've had enough. I've got to get this stuff out of my house. Anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. It's gotten me excited about going back to the thrift store, which I think I'm going to do probably maybe in 2 days. Yeah, I'm recording this on a Wednesday for Friday. So as you're listening to this, just know that I'm probably going to be at the thrift store as you're listening to this. Be sure to come back next week for episode 17. I think I'm going to continue on with this idea of thrift stores and upcycling. And I'm going to give you my 10 questions. Now, these are 10 questions that I try to teach people to ask themselves before they repurpose anything. A lot of times people say, well, I'm not very creative. I'm not creative. I don't know how to repurpose. I don't know how to come up with ideas. Well, there's 10 clever questions that you can ask yourself in order to get ideas on how to repurpose anything. And if you don't believe me, you just got to come back for episode 17 because we're going to talk about it. Also, too, if you are on Instagram, be sure to follow me. Go to Instagram, look for Thrift Diving. I'm there. I don't post all the time. A lot of times I'm working on projects. And if you're not following me on YouTube, follow me there because I'm usually posting videos. Lately, I've been not posting. I've been really bad about posting. And that's because I'm working on a closet makeover. If you remember, I'll give you a little update. If you remember, I started that closet makeover, oh my gosh, October of 2019. It's embarrassing to even say out loud because it literally has taken a year and a half to get to this point. And it started with me removing all the wallpaper, painting the wall, and then I just left it that way for 6 months or more. So back in November, and I'll leave this link down below for those who want to see it. Back in November, I completed one half of the closet organizer, but I still had the other side to do. And with thrift diving, I get a lot of emails from brands. I get other projects that come up that have to get done first. And so this closet makeover kept getting pushed aside and pushed aside and pushed aside. So now we're into May and I'm probably about 2/3 away done this project, right? I'm building a dresser with drawers and adjustable shelves so we can fold clothes. And I mean, it's a lot. It's very, very tedious. And sometimes I just wonder, I'm like, why am I so slow? Why does it take me so long to do projects? Why is it taking me so long to get this done? But that's a whole other conversation because I do want to talk to you about that in an upcoming episode about why it can take so long to get projects done and what do you do if you don't have any space? That's another problem that I'm having. But I don't want to unload too much on you in one episode, but just know I am still here. I'm still doing podcast. I'm still editing video and recording video. I'm just a person of one and I'm just moving slowly. That's it. Okay, so be sure to come back next week when we're going to talk about upcycling and how you can come up with creative ideas. And again, be sure to find me on Apple, Google, all of those places, and leave a review. I love it. I love your feedback. Okay, guys, I will see you next podcast episode.